Hello everyone. Today I am going to show you a demo of Entity Studio. Entity Studio is a full-stack identity infrastructure for building privacy-preserving products using encryption and tokenized credentials and blockchain. The Entity Studio is a utility dashboard built on top of HyperSign network and is fully compliant with W3C DID and verifiable credential standards. The Entity Studio can also be used as a visual playground for learning self-sovereign data concepts. This demo is divided into two parts. The first part, where we learn about how an issuer comes on the platform and issues a credential to a user, and the second part of this demo will explain how a verifier verifies the credentials in an app. This happens when a user presents the credential to the verifier for verification while requesting for a service. So let's begin with part 1 of the demo. Imagine a user holding a digital wallet which is requesting a KYC credential from an issuer. Let's call it Bank A. The user submits some personal details to Bank A. The issuer logs into Entity Studio using Wallet, which is neatly integrated with the Entity Studio login page. Upon login, at first we need to create an organization by clicking on the Create button. In technical terms, an organization in Entity Studio is just a public DID whose controller is the admin who has logged into the platform. Now, let's give it a name and a domain name and click on the Save button to create this organization. Since it's going to be a public on-chain DID, the wallet needs to sign the transaction, and there we go. Our organizational DID is created. Now, we can quickly verify this DID on-chain by clicking on this link. That's our DID. Our organizational DID has now been created. Check this controller field. Bear in mind, this DID is different from the DID of this document. Now, we will come back to this to understand what's the meaning of these two, the controller fields and the ID field here. Now that our organization has been created, we can go ahead and issue a credential to the user. For that, we need to first switch to this organization and then click on Create to issue a credential to a user. However, we cannot directly issue a credential unless we have a schema for this credential. A schema is nothing but the format or the model of the credential document. It defines what fields the credential is going to contain. So let's just create a schema, give it a name and a description, and then define the fields which are required for this credential. And then click on Save to create the schema. Again, since the schema is going to be on-chain, we need to sign the transaction. There we go. The schema has also been registered. We can now quickly verify the status of the schema on the chain. So this is our schema document, and we can see all the properties that we have created. And the author of the schema is basically the organization which has created this schema. So remember, we now have an organization DID called, it ends with 1Z2QFY. And here the author is again 1Z2QFY. Now that our KYC schema has been created, we are ready to issue a verifiable credential to the user. Let's assume that I'm going to issue this credential to myself. For that, I need my own DID, which I can get from my wallet and issue the credential to myself. I'll select the KYC schema, populate all the fields with desired values, and give an expiration date and hit the Save button to register the credential status on the blockchain. Remember, the verifiable credential is a private document, but the status of this credential gets registered on the chain. So once the credential has been issued, its status gets registered on the chain. Now that the credential status has been registered on the blockchain, we can quickly verify the status of the credential on the blockchain as well. So here, the status of the credential is live when it is issued, when it's going to expire, and also the hash of the credentials, which will be required when someone verifies this credential. Notice the issuer over here is 1Z2QFY, which is nothing but the organization DID, the organization who has created the credential. So now the owner of this schema is also the organization and the author of this schema. And the issuer of this schema is also this organization, and the organization has been controlled by the admins whose DID has been added as a controller in this controller array. Now, if, at some point in time, this user decides to transfer this organization to someone else or needs to add more of their teammates, they should be able to do it, and those new users will now have access to these documents and the schema status document. We will come back to this concept again once I explain how we can revoke a credential. The final step of this, part 1 of this demo, is to send this credential to the user so that they can accept and store this credential in their wallet. Click on this icon to generate the QR or a link for the user to accept the credential. In the identity wallet, you can see, I only have an email schema or an email credential. As a user, I click on this Accept Credential in the Web Wallet button and then accept this credential in my wallet. Now, if I go to my Credentials tab page, I can see I have KYC credential issued to me. I can see all the details. Who is the issuer? The issuer is ZQ2FY again. The organization was issued to me, and all the fields that we defined in the schema are present here. So, in summary, in the first part of this demo, we have seen how an issuer can issue a verifiable credential using a schema to the user, and how a user can accept the credential in their wallet. In part 2, we will see how a verifier, bank, can request the credential from the user who presents the credential in a form of something called verifiable presentation to the verifier. The verifier, bank, then verifies this presentation and lets the user access their self-application or services. To request the presentation from the user, the verifier, bank, has to first create a presentation template. The presentation template defines what information the verifier, bank, needs from the user to provide the service. So let's just go ahead and create the presentation template in the Introduce Studio dashboard. Give it a name and select the schema which you want to request. Provide a reason for requesting this information and hit Save to create this presentation template. Remember, the presentation template is not an on-chain activity. Once the verifier bank creates the presentation template, they can then design the UI to request the credential from the users either via QR code or a button. Side note, designing this UI is pretty simple using Entity Studio JavaScript SDK. All you have to do is add this script and listen to a few events in your HTML page. For the purpose of this demo, I have created a HTML page and hosted it on a server running on port 1234. Once you add the script, make sure to replace this presentation template ID. You can also change the button text if you need. There we go. The user is ready to present their credential now, either through scanning the QR code or through clicking this button. Click on this button to present this credential to the verifier. Bank. Authorize it. And here the user has shared his details or the data with the verifier. With this, we now conclude part 2 of this demo. Before I end this demo, I want to show you 2 points. First, how can we revoke credentials? So as an issuer, I should have the ability to revoke the status of this credential. Go to the Credential tab, click on this edit icon and change the status from live to revoke. Now, as you know, the credential status is an on-chain activity. We need to do a transaction on-chain and provide a reason why you want to revoke this credential. Authorize it. So this credential status has been revoked. Now, if the users try to present the credential again, the verifier should not be able to verify it. So let's try to do that. Here we see that we could not authorize the user. Why? Because the credential status has already been revoked. You can also see the status of the credential on the blockchain. So this is our chain. Now the credential status is revoked. The reason is some reason which I had given. And finally, I want to talk about how you can grant access rights within your organization to your teammates so that they can now collaborate on documents or other online projects. So I have another user in another browser. So I will pick up the user's DID and add them in the controller field of the DID document of the organization. And of course, I need to do a transaction for this. All right. So now if I open this, I can see there are 2 controllers who have access to this organization. And if I go back to the dashboard of that user and reload this page, this guy should have access to the organization now. So you can see our organization was Z2QFY, right? If I switch to this organization, I can see other details like credentials, schema, and so on. So this concludes my entire demo. So just to recap, we created an organization. We created a schema and issued a credential to the user, and created a presentation template. And then we designed the UI to request the template from the user's wallet. The user then presents the template. We revoked the credential, and then the template was not able to be presented. And then finally, we decided to add our teammates to get access to this organization. Now, if I go back to the org DID again, this one, earlier it had 1 controller, and now it will have 2 controllers who can control this DID document. So with this, what I'm trying to say is, this access mechanism is happening on chain, right? So nobody can just go and delete something from the Entity Studio server. Entity Studio server is acting just as a cache, and the truth of the data exists on the blockchain. So that was the demo of the Entity Studio. Would you like to try it out? Get in touch with us for a hands-on demo. Thank you very much.